The police arrived while a 6-year-old boy was carrying hamburger buns, not during a fight. Not because of drugs. Not because someone got hurt, but because an HOA president claimed a family barbecue was threatening the peace of the neighborhood. At first, the officers thought it would be a simple noise complaint. Then one of them noticed something strange. Half the street was quietly recording. The HOA president looked furious. The grandfather at the grill looked embarrassed. And the little boy standing near the picnic table looked terrified. What happened over the next 7 days completely destroyed one woman's reputation and exposed what had really been happening inside that neighborhood for years. Marcus Hill had the kind of face people trusted. Immediately, maybe it was the greybeard, maybe it was the tired eyes that always looked patient, or maybe it was because Marcus spent most of his life helping people without talking about it. If your fence collapsed during a storm, Marcus showed up with tools. If your car battery died, Marcus had jumper cables before you finished asking. When Mrs. Patterson's husband died 2 winters earlier, Marcus quietly shoveled her driveway every morning for almost a month, never charged her $1, never told anyone. That was just who he was, which is why the entire situation felt so unbelievable to the people who knew him, especially because Marcus hated drama. He lived in Maple Grove Estates, a quiet HOA neighborhood outside Houston, Texas. The houses were clean. Lawns were trimmed perfectly. American flags hung from front porches like decorations copied from the same magazine. From the outside, it looked peaceful, but people who lived there knew something. Outsiders didn't. The HOA had slowly become unbearable, and almost every problem traced back to one person, Victoria Grayson, Victoria. Grayson didn't think she was a villain. That was the dangerous part. She genuinely believed she was protecting the neighborhood. At 54 years old, Victoria treated Maple Grove like her personal project. She talked constantly about property values and community standards, but over the years, something changed. Rules stopped being rules. They became control. Residents received warnings for things nobody cared about. Basketball. Hoops visible too long after sunset. Christmas lights still. Hanging on January 3rd. A garden hose left near a driveway. One family received a violation because their trash can lid was slightly open. People stopped arguing. Because fighting with Victoria was exhausting, she documented everything: photos, emails, notes, timestamps. Some residents joked she acted like an FBI agent trapped inside suburbia. Others weren't joking. The worst part? Victoria targeted certain people more than others, and Marcus had become one of her favourites. Not because he caused problems, because he refused to fear her. 3 months before the barbecue incident, Marcus received a violation letter about his driveway. Apparently, oil stains from his truck were considered visually disruptive. Marcus stared at the letter for almost a full minute before laughing softly. Then he cleaned the driveway. Problem solved. But a week later, another letter arrived, this time over wind chimes. The week after that, his garbage bins had been visible from the street for an extended period. Marcus finally walked to the HOA office carrying all 3 letters. Kevin. Morales looked exhausted before Marcus even sat down. Kevin was the HOA compliance officer, early 30s, overworked, constantly apologizing for things he clearly didn't agree with. Marcus dropped the letters onto the desk. Kevin. Be honest with me. Kevin rubbed his forehead immediately. That bad? Do my wind chimes really threaten civilization? Kevin sighed. She specifically asked me to monitor your property. Marcus blinked slowly. Why? Kevin hesitated, then lowered his voice. Because you challenged her during the last board meeting. Marcus remembered instantly. Victoria wanted stricter parking regulations. Marcus publicly disagreed. That was it. That tiny disagreement somehow turned him into a target. She does this with people sometimes, Kevin admitted quietly. Marcus leaned back in the chair. Man, this is supposed to be a neighborhood. Not prison. Kevin laughed nervously. You'd be surprised how many people say that. Marcus left calmly. But for the first time since moving into Maple Grove, he started feeling uncomfortable in his own home. The barbecue wasn't supposed to become a major event. Originally, it was just dinner. Marcus's daughter Jasmine wanted the family together because her husband, Darren, had recently returned from a 3-month work contract overseas. Nothing fancy, just burgers, ribs, music, and family. But word spread quickly through the neighbourhood, mostly because people liked being around Marcus. By Friday evening, 3 neighbours had casually asked, "You grilling tomorrow?" Marcus laughed every time. "Depends. You bringing food?" Saturday morning arrived warm and sunny, perfect barbecue weather. Marcus woke up early, stepped outside, and inhaled deeply. The air smelled like fresh-cut grass and charcoal. For the first time in weeks, he felt relaxed. His grandson Caleb helped carry folding chairs into the backyard, while Marcus seasoned ribs carefully beside the smoker. "Grandpa." "Yeah?" "Mum says HOA lady doesn't like parties." Marcus smiled faintly. "She doesn't like noise." Caleb looked confused. "But people are noisy." Marcus chuckled. "Exactly." At 2:13 p.m, Victoria Grayson drove slowly past Marcus's house for the 3rd time. She noticed everything immediately. Cars already lining the curb, music equipment near the patio, coolers stacked beside the deck. Her jaw tightened, because earlier that week, another resident complained to her privately about constant gatherings in the neighbourhood. That resident never mentioned Marcus specifically, but Victoria connected it instantly. In her mind, Marcus represented disorder, too social, too loud, too unconcerned with regulations. She parked across the street and watched quietly, and then something happened that pushed her over the edge. 2 teenage boys carried a portable speaker into the backyard. Victoria stared at it like someone unloading explosives. She checked the HOA handbook inside her car. Page 42, noise. Disturbances, community disruption, excessive. Gatherings. Her breathing slowed. Now she had justification, or at least she believed she did. By 4:30 p.m, the backyard was full. Kids ran through sprinklers. Neighbours laughed near the grill. Music played softly from old speakers. Not nightclub. Loud, cookout loud. The kind of noise normal people barely notice. Marcus moved between the smoker and picnic tables with relaxed confidence. For the first time in months, Maple Grove actually felt alive. Even people who rarely spoke to each other were socialising. A young couple from 3 houses down introduced themselves to neighbours they'd lived beside for over a year. An elderly widow sat under the shade smiling while children played tag nearby. It felt human, warm, real, and honestly, that bothered Victoria more than the noise itself, because Victoria didn't control moments like these. Community made her uncomfortable unless she organised it personally. At 5:11 p.m, she called Kevin. "You need to come here immediately." Kevin sounded tired already. "What happened now?" "There's a massive unauthorised gathering at Marcus Hill's property." Kevin paused. "A barbecue?" "A disruption." Kevin exhaled slowly. "I'll take a look." Kevin arrived 20 minutes later and immediately realised Victoria exaggerated everything. He stepped through the gate carefully while Marcus flipped burgers. "Kevin!" Marcus shouted. "You eating?" Victoria stood nearby with crossed arms. Kevin looked around awkwardly. Honestly, it looked fun. Children laughing, neighbours talking, the smell of smoked ribs floating through the air. "This is what the emergency was?" Kevin asked quietly. Victoria ignored him. "The music can be heard from inside my home." Marcus looked genuinely confused. "Mom, your house is 30 feet away. The rules clearly state people can also hear birds outside." Marcus interrupted calmly. Several neighbours laughed. Victoria's expression hardened instantly. Kevin tried de-escalating. Maybe lower the speaker slightly just to avoid problems. Marcus nodded immediately. "Sure, no problem." And for a moment, it looked finished. That should have been the end. But Victoria wasn't satisfied, because this was never really about noise. It was about losing authority. And when Marcus calmly agreed instead of arguing, she somehow became even angrier. Around 6 p.m, more guests arrived than expected. Now the street became crowded. One truck partially blocked a mailbox. Teenagers laughed loudly near the sidewalk, and for the first time all evening, The barbecue actually started becoming disruptive. Not terrible, but noticeable. Marcus saw it immediately. "Darren," he called quietly. "Move that truck before somebody complains." Unfortunately, Victoria had already taken pictures. Lots of pictures. She photographed license plates, speaker, equipment, crowded sidewalks, everything. Then she noticed something else. One teenage boy accidentally dropped a soda can near the curb and walked away without noticing. Victoria stared at the can like a detective discovering evidence at a crime scene. That was the exact moment she made her decision. She called the police. The dispatcher sounded confused almost immediately. "So, what exactly is happening?" Victoria straightened in her chair. "There's an escalating disturbance involving aggressive behaviour and excessive noise. Technically not a complete lie, but definitely misleading. Any violence?" "Not yet." The third letter arrived with a bright orange sticker that read, "Property line warning." 72-year-old Walter Green stood frozen at the edge of his porch while dozens of hungry birds circled above his yard. The HOA claimed he was destroying neighbourhood property values. His crime? Feeding birds every morning. At first, Walter thought the letters were ridiculous. Then someone smashed his bird feeders in the middle of the night. Then neighbours started whispering when he walked outside. Then the HOA president threatened to take his home. But the worst part came 3 days later, when Walter discovered who had secretly been reporting him the entire time, and by the end of the month, the entire neighbourhood would turn against the HOA in a way nobody saw coming. Walter Green woke up every morning at exactly 6:15. Not because he wanted to, because after 43 years of factory work, his body no longer knew how to sleep late. Even retirement hadn't changed that. Neither had grief. Every morning, sunlight crept through the thin kitchen curtains while the old coffee machine rattled loudly on the counter. Walter would pour himself half a cup, stare at the empty chair across from him for a few seconds, then quietly look away. Helen used to sit there. 3 years had passed since cancer took her, but Walter still couldn't bring himself to move her favourite chair. Some mornings he caught himself listening for her footsteps anyway. The silence afterward always hurt. That was why the birds mattered so much. At 6:30 every morning, Walter stepped onto his front porch carrying an old red coffee tin filled with birdseed. And almost instantly, they appeared, first the sparrows, then the cardinals, then blue jays screaming loudly from nearby trees. By 6:35, his yard came alive with fluttering wings and tiny chirping sounds that filled the quiet neighbourhood air. Helen loved that sound, especially the cardinals. She used to believe cardinals carried messages from loved ones who passed away. Walter never really believed things like that. But after she died, the birds became the closest thing he had left to company. So every morning he fed them, and every morning for a little while, the house didn't feel so empty, until the letters started arriving. The first one came on a rainy Tuesday morning. Walter almost threw it away without opening it. Most HOA mail was nonsense anyway. Reminder notices, lawn maintenance updates, holiday decoration deadlines. But this envelope was different. Bright white, red lettering, official violation notice. Walter adjusted his glasses slowly, then he read the sentence twice. "You are hereby notified that feeding wildlife constitutes a violation of community sanitation standards." Walter blinked. Wildlife? He looked out the kitchen window. 3 sparrows hopped harmlessly near the feeder, one tiny cardinal perched on the fence. "This has got to be a joke," he muttered. The letter warned him to immediately remove all feeders and discontinue wildlife attraction activities. Failure to comply would result in a $100 fine. Walter actually laughed, then tossed the letter onto the counter. Problem solved, or so he thought. 3 days later, another envelope arrived. This time the fine was $200. Walter frowned deeply while reading it. At the bottom of the page was a handwritten note. Previous warning ignored. Something about that sentence bothered him, not because of the fine, because of the tone. It felt personal. Walter walked outside carrying the letter. Across the street, curtains shifted slightly inside one of the homes. Someone had been watching him. he suddenly became aware of how quiet the neighborhood felt. Too quiet. Maple Glen always looked perfect from the outside. Clean sidewalks, perfect lawns, matching fences. But people rarely talked to each other anymore. Most communication happened through complaint emails and HOA notices. Walter never paid much attention before. Now he started noticing everything. The woman 2 houses down who stopped watering flowers the second someone walked past. The teenager who hurriedly moved his bicycle after receiving a parking warning. The old couple who removed their porch swing after HOA complaints. Everyone seemed nervous all the time, and suddenly, Walter was nervous too. That evening, Walter sat, alone in his living room staring at the second violation notice, $200. That mattered. His retirement income barely covered groceries and medication already. Helen's medical treatments had destroyed most of their savings years ago. He picked up the framed photo sitting beside the lamp. Helen smiled, brightly from inside the picture, while holding a tiny red cardinal figurine she once bought at a craft fair. "You'd think they'd have bigger problems," Walter muttered softly. Outside, rain tapped against the windows. Walter looked toward the dark backyard, then slowly stood up. 5 minutes later, he stepped outside wearing an old jacket and carrying fresh birdseed. The birds landed before he even reached the feeder. Walter smiled faintly. "I'm not abandoning you guys." Across the street, a phone camera snapped a picture. Walter never noticed. The third letter arrived Monday morning. This time, the fine was $400. Walter's stomach dropped immediately. At the bottom of the page was a sentence that made his chest tighten. Continued violations may result in legal action and property liens. Walter sat down heavily at the kitchen table. Property liens. They were threatening his house now. Over birds. For the first time, fear started replacing anger. He imagined lawyers, courtrooms, bills he couldn't pay. What if they actually could take his house? His hands shook slightly while rereading the notice. Then suddenly, bang! Walter jumped violently. Something hit the front window. He hurried outside. A rotten orange rolled across the porch. Teenage laughter echoed from farther down the street before disappearing. Walter stood there silently holding the violation letter while birdseed scattered around his shoes. Someone in the neighborhood wanted him gone, and things were getting worse. The monthly HOA meeting took place Thursday night inside the Maple Glen clubhouse. Walter almost didn't go, but fear finally outweighed discomfort. He entered quietly while residents filled metal folding chairs beneath bright fluorescent lights. At the front sat Cynthia Holloway, HOA president, late 50s, blonde hair cut perfectly sharp, white blazer without a wrinkle anywhere. She looked like someone who corrected grammar during funerals. Walter had lived in Maple Glen nearly 20 years, and somehow Cynthia had made the neighborhood feel colder within only 3. Walter took a seat near the back. The meeting dragged endlessly through landscaping budgets and trash can regulations until finally Cynthia asked, "Any resident concerns?" Walter slowly stood. The room immediately became uncomfortable. People recognized him now. Birdman. Walter cleared his throat. "I'd like to discuss these fines I've been receiving." Cynthia didn't smile. "The wildlife violations?" "They're birds," Walter replied calmly. Cynthia folded her hands. "Several residents have complained about sanitation concerns and excessive animal activity." Walter frowned. "I've fed these birds for almost 10 years. The board recently reviewed the matter." Walter noticed something strange. Nobody looked at him. Not one person. They stared at tables, papers, coffee cups, ashamed, afraid. Walter suddenly understood. People weren't just scared of Cynthia. They were scared of becoming targets themselves. Then a voice interrupted the silence. "That's ridiculous." Heads turned instantly. A woman near the side wall crossed her arms tightly. Rachel Torres, early 30s, dark brown hair tied back messily, exhausted eyes, single mother. Walter knew her only from brief mailbox conversations. Rachel looked directly at Cynthia. My son watches those birds every morning before school, she said. They're harmless. Cynthia's jaw tightened slightly. The HOA board already voted. Rachel frowned. Really? Because my cousin checked public records this afternoon. The room grew very still. Rachel pulled folded papers from her purse. There's no record of any board vote. Murmurs spread instantly. Cynthia interrupted sharply. This meeting isn't up for debate. No, Rachel replied, but abuse of authority should be. The temperature inside the room seemed to change immediately. People shifted in chairs. Walter stared at Rachel in shock. Nobody ever challenged Cynthia publicly. Nobody. Cynthia's voice hardened. Mr. Green will comply with neighbourhood standards. Walter looked around the room again. Still no eye contact. Still silence. Then Rachel spoke one more sentence, quietly, but loudly enough for everyone to hear. You're bullying an old man because he feeds birds. The room exploded into whispers. Cynthia slammed her gavel loudly. Meeting adjourned. Walter barely slept that night. He kept replaying the meeting in his head, Rachel defending him, the silence from neighbours. Cynthia's cold expression. At 5:45 a.m, Walter finally gave up trying to sleep. He pulled on his jacket and stepped outside carrying birdseed, then stopped dead. Every bird feeder was gone. The wooden poles had been ripped from the ground. One feeder lay smashed near the sidewalk. Birdseed covered the wet grass like spilled sand. The dispatcher paused. Any weapons? There's open fire in the backyard. She meant the grill, but she intentionally worded it differently, and that choice would later become very important. At 6:42 p.m, flashing lights appeared near the entrance of Maple Grove. Music stopped almost instantly. Children froze. Conversations faded. Marcus looked toward the street slowly, while smoke drifted upward from the smoker grill. No way, Darren muttered. 2 officers stepped out. Officer Daniels and Officer Ruiz. Both looked prepared for conflict. Then they entered the backyard and immediately became confused. Officer Ruiz looked around carefully. Families eating hamburgers, kids with juice boxes, a grandfather holding barbecue tongs. This wasn't what dispatch described. Victoria approached quickly. Thank God you're here. Officer Daniels remained calm. Ma'am, what exactly seems to be the issue? This gathering has become hostile and disruptive. Marcus stepped forward carefully. Officers, we're just having dinner. Then something subtle happened. Officer Ruiz noticed multiple residents quietly recording with phones. That usually meant one thing. There was history here. The officers exchanged a glance. Officer Daniels asked calmly, Has anyone threatened anybody? Victoria answered first. They refused to comply with HOA regulations. That's not what I asked. She hesitated. No direct threats. Officer Daniels turned toward Marcus. Sir, can you lower the noise a little? Marcus nodded immediately. Already did. Any alcohol-related problems? No, sir. Any fighting? No. The officers looked around again. Honestly, the loudest thing in the entire backyard was a child laughing near the sprinkler. Then Caleb walked over quietly holding a paper plate. He looked terrified. Grandpa, are you in trouble? And suddenly the entire mood changed. Officer Ruiz crouched slightly. Nobody's in trouble. But Caleb didn't look convinced. He grabbed Marcus's arm tightly. That moment hit harder than anything else that night. Even some neighbours looked uncomfortable now, because suddenly this wasn't funny anymore. A child genuinely believed his grandfather might be arrested over hamburgers. Officer Daniels finally spoke carefully. Ma'am, respectfully, this appears to be a normal family gathering. Victoria's face tightened. You clearly don't understand the ongoing issues here. What ongoing issues? The constant disregard for standards. Officer Daniels remained professional. HOA disputes are civil matters. Victoria crossed her arms harder. So you're refusing to enforce community rules? That's not police jurisdiction. Several people nearby quietly smiled. Victoria noticed, and panic flickered across her face for the first time all evening, because she realised something dangerous. The crowd wasn't supporting her anymore. They were watching her, judging her. Then an older neighbour named Frank unexpectedly spoke up. She called cops over ribs, he muttered loudly. Laughter spread instantly across the sidewalk. Victoria turned bright red. Officer Ruiz tried hiding a smile. That was the exact second she lost control of the situation. Most people assumed the story would end there. They were wrong, because Darren's security cameras recorded almost everything, including Victoria photographing the property repeatedly. Including her confrontation with Kevin, and most importantly, audio from her police call captured through a nearby outdoor camera microphone, especially the part where she described the barbecue as potentially dangerous. Darren reviewed footage later that night while Jasmine sat beside him furious. She made it sound violent. Marcus looked exhausted. Just let it go. But Jasmine shook her head. No, Caleb thought you were getting arrested. Marcus didn't answer. Because honestly, that part hurt him too, more than he wanted to admit. The next morning, Frank uploaded a short clip online. Nothing edited dramatically, just simple footage. Police standing beside a barbecue grill while children carried hot dog buns in the background. Caption: HOA president calls cops on grandfather's cookout. Within hours, local community groups shared it everywhere. Then someone uploaded the security footage. That changed everything, especially the dispatch audio. People became furious after hearing how exaggerated the complaint sounded. Comments exploded. She reported a grill like it was a hostage situation. This is exactly why people hate HOAs. The poor kid asking if Grandpa was in trouble broke my heart, but not everyone sided with Marcus, and that actually made the story stronger. Some commenters argued the party was two large streets. Where crowded HOA rules exist for a reason, suddenly the story became debate fuel online, which pushed engagement even higher. Local news stations noticed. Then regional blogs picked it up, and by Monday afternoon, Maple Grove Estates became internet famous for all the wrong reasons. Victoria expected support from the HOA board. Instead, board members started distancing themselves immediately. Because more residents began speaking publicly. One family revealed they'd been fined over chalk drawings, another showed warning letters about holiday decorations. An elderly resident admitted she stopped inviting grandchildren over because she feared complaints about noise. The deeper people looked, the worse Victoria appeared. But here's where the story becomes important. Victoria still believed she was right. That's what made everything spiral further. Monday evening, she posted a long statement inside the HOA Facebook group defending her actions. And it completely backfired. She accused residents of encouraging disorder. She claimed Marcus's gatherings lowered neighbourhood standards. Then she made the fatal mistake. She referred to the barbecue as a potentially unsafe event requiring precautionary intervention. People lost their minds. Even residents who normally avoided drama became angry, because now she sounded ridiculous. Tuesday morning, Marcus sat alone in his backyard staring at the cold grill. The internet attention overwhelmed him. News vans occasionally drove through the neighbourhood. Neighbours kept knocking on his door. Strangers online called him a hero, but Marcus didn't feel like one. He felt embarrassed, tired, exposed. Jasmine walked outside quietly holding coffee. You okay? Marcus shrugged slowly. I didn't want all this. You didn't cause it. He stared toward the fence. When those police walked in, Caleb looked scared to death. His voice cracked slightly. That bothered me. Jasmine sat beside him quietly. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Marcus admitted something unexpected. I almost sold this house last night. Jasmine looked stunned. You're serious? I'm too old for constant fighting. That moment changed everything emotionally, because now the audience finally saw vulnerability. Marcus wasn't just the calm neighbourhood hero anymore. He was tired, human, and close to giving up. Tuesday night became chaos before the meeting even started. Cars overflowed into nearby streets. Residents who never attended meetings suddenly packed the clubhouse. Some came angry, some came curious, some just wanted to witness the drama live. Victoria arrived carrying folders thick with documents. Marcus almost didn't come at all, but Caleb changed his mind accidentally. Grandpa? Yeah, buddy? You're not moving, right? Marcus looked down slowly and realised something. If he left because of fear, people like Victoria would keep winning forever, so he attended. And the moment he entered the clubhouse, people quietly applauded. Victoria noticed immediately. Her expression darkened. Board President Harold Jenkins attempted professionalism. "We're here to discuss recent community concerns." That lasted maybe 30 seconds. Then residents erupted. "You wasted police resources. You target people personally. You turned this place into a retirement prison." Victoria tried interrupting repeatedly. But now people were no longer afraid of her. That was new. Then Kevin stood up unexpectedly, and the room became silent instantly, because Kevin still worked for the HOA. "People deserve honesty," he said quietly. Victoria immediately panicked. "Kevin, sit down." He ignored her, then he revealed everything: how residents were selectively targeted, how minor complaints became formal violations under pressure, how he'd been instructed to watch certain homes more closely, including Marcus's. Gasps spread across the room. Victoria looked stunned, not because Kevin spoke, because he disobeyed her publicly. That had probably never happened before. Then Kevin delivered the sentence that destroyed her completely. "This stopped being about rules a long time ago." Silence. Heavy silence. Even board members looked uncomfortable. Victoria finally snapped. "You people don't understand what happens when standards disappear." Nobody answered, so she continued. "First it's loud parties, then neglected homes. Then property values collapse." Marcus stood slowly, calmly, and looked directly at her. "My grandson thought I was going to jail." The room became completely silent again. Marcus continued softly. "He's 6. No yelling, no dramatic speech. Just pain, real pain, and somehow that hit harder than every argument before it." Victoria opened her mouth to respond.